Group Statements, Chapter 1 to 3. Companies often invest in the shares of other companies to form groups of companies. For these groups of companies, you have to prepare consolidated financial statements, or in short, group statements. This presentation will focus on the primary concepts involved in preparing these group financial statements, and specifically those included in Chapter 1 to 3 of Introduction to Consolidations. Groups of companies are very relevant, they're very real, and it's highly likely that you will have encounters with groups of companies in your future world of work, either being part of the audit teams auditing these groups of companies, maybe working at some of the companies in the group, or you can end up having share investments in these companies where you would then have a close eye on the movement in share prices and financial markets, whatever the case might be. So let's have a look at some groups of companies in the real world. What I've put up here is a representation of the Naspers group. Now, typically, the parent company, in this instance, Naspers, isn't the familiar company, the one you hear about too often. And that's because the parent company is usually the company that's listed on one of the various stock exchanges across the world. It's not the operational company as such. But when you then start looking at the groups and the operational companies, then you come across the more familiar brands and companies that you are familiar with. For example, under the video and entertainment segment of the Naspers group, we have DStv, we have SuperSport, Showmax. Under print and digital media, we have Spree, Careers24, News24. Under classified segment, we have OLX, Property24, etc. So suddenly these companies are what we are familiar with, that we do engage with on a regular basis. And then you start realizing that the companies that we are aware of are actually part of a bigger picture, a bigger group of companies, and this is now where we start focusing on the financial reporting of this bigger group of companies. Can you perhaps think of any other groups of companies that you are familiar with, that you know about? If you don't, you can always Google that, group structures of big companies on the internet, and see what pops up and start getting an idea of what is the big groups out there, but then looking at the operational companies inside those groups to just get a bit of a bigger picture perspective of groups of companies. I have put up here a few of the group structures that I came across when I searched for it on the internet. The one on the left top corner you would have seen before in your reporting entity slides as part of the framework lectures. And I've just put it up again here that you can see how enormous some of these groups are and how involved and intricate and complex the structure of these groups of companies can actually be. Then I put up the TFG group. And again, if I say TFG, it's not that familiar, but when you start looking at the operational entities, it becomes more familiar, like Total Sports, American Swiss, Markham, Donna Claire, Foschini. And what I want you to see here is in the group structure of the TFG group, there's a very specific distinction between the value entities, the mid-market companies, and the upper companies. And that's an indicator of how a group of companies is diverse and structured in such a way to penetrate different segments of the particular market. The same goes for the VW, the Volkswagen brand structure. You have your volume cars like the Volkswagen, which you see on a more regular basis driving on the roads. Then you have your premium segment, which is your Audi vehicles, and then super premium, which is your Porsche, Bentley, Bugatti, and Lamborghini vehicles, which you do not see as often driving on the roads. But again, the VW brand and the VW group are structured in such a way that it penetrates different market segments and then ultimately gains a bigger market share. Let's now look at some of the motivations behind these groups forming. Usually when one company gains control over another company, or more than one company, the group forms, and there's an intended benefit from gaining that control. I've listed a few reasons here, or a few motivations, but I want you to think of existing groups that you are aware of, that you're familiar with, that you came across in your internet search. Look at the companies, look at the market share, the market diversification, and just think, why do you think this group formed? What is the benefits gained from forming that group? So when one company gains control over another company, it controls that company's business, the technologies used in that company, the assets used in that company, the capabilities, the expertise of personnel, the suppliers that that company uses, the distributors, the clientele. And when you gain control over that company, you gain control over all of those factors. And then you would do that with intending to gain benefit from it. So that synergy between the companies being able to work together, supplying raw materials at a better cost price, for instance. Rapid growth. If you buy an existing company that's already in the market, already operating, you can grow the company and the group's business much faster than having to start a new company. As I've mentioned in the previous slide, you have increased market share, increased market power. By gaining entrance into a lower market, mid-market, higher market, immediately you have that benefit of the increased market share. Economies of scale. If you are able in the group to manufacture your product on a larger scale with more products that you manufacture, more units, you gain that economies of scale benefit because certain costs will remain the same. Access to new technology, as I've said, diversification. The moment you are more diverse, you have a bigger market share, bigger clientele, bigger revenue, and bigger turnover. So have a look at these. Think of, as I said, existing companies, existing groups, and just form a general idea in your mind as to why we would have these groups forming and the motivations behind it.